And our next witness is Mr. Collin, who is the President and CEO of National Wildlife Federation. Thanks for being with us. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Olson, Mr. Tonko. Thank you for having a wildlife voice on this panel and a sportsman voice on this panel. When this law was debated in 2007, there wasn't much conversation about land use. And as I travel the country, I keep having that Toby Keith song in my head. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. There's a lot that we didn't know in 2007 about land use. There's a study by the United States Department of Agriculture that said that more than 8 million acres that were not in production, that were in some kind of habitat, are now in production. And a big chunk of that is because of the RFS. There's just a study from the University of Wisconsin that said that 7.4 million acres of habitat has gone into production. 67% of that land is marginal. I mean, these are things like grassland prairies. These are things like some wetlands and some forest land. And there are a lot of factors for this, but one of the big reasons is this massive drive towards ethanol. Ethanol production, in terms of the total kind of all supply of corn that's being produced, went from 9% going towards ethanol before the RFS to 40% today. So you're seeing a big demand, and farmers are rational. I mean, I grew up in a farming community in upstate New York. If there's a profit there, they should go there. But it's an artificial one that's being created by government, and once again, wildlife and sportsmen are the ones that lose. 77% of this 8 million acres that both USDA and University of Wisconsin identified are grasslands. And these are incredibly important lands. I mean, you've had conversations before this committee and others around the imperiled sage grouse, around the meadowlark. I mean, things that you're hearing are having kind of precipitous declines. We're losing habitat at a pretty alarming rate. I mean, pheasant numbers right now in a whole lot of states are down. They had a million birds were shot in Iowa before the RFS. We're about 100,000 now. Again, there's many factors, but the drive for more and more corn on the ground is a big one of those. And again, wildlife and sportsmen end up losing. I mean, if you only take one thing away from my testimony today, it's that we have to better understand these land use impacts and the water implications. If you look right now, we've lost more than 1 million acres, 1.6 million acres of native grasslands from 2008 till today. That's bigger than my home state of Delaware. I mean, that's a lot of land. And when you start thinking about those uses, it gets kind of scary when these volumes continue to go up. There was a commitment that this Congress made when we were debating this policy originally that there would be no lands that weren't in production before 2007 would be affected by this policy. And unfortunately, though, EPA has never upheld their end of the bargain. They use something that they call aggregate compliance. And so they basically look at all the acres across the entire country, including those that are in the Conservation Reserve Program. So look at all these acres, and they see whether or not there's any kind of impact. They don't know whether there's forests being lost in Wisconsin or Minnesota. They don't know whether there's wetlands being lost in the prairie potholes. They don't know whether there's kind of impacts in Nebraska or Iowa in the grasslands. And again, wildlife loses over and over again. I'd also like to talk about water, because one of the things that happens when you put more and more corn in production, you have folks switching from other crops to corn. Corn is pretty hard on soils. You need a lot of fertilizer to grow corn. And what ends up happening is, as you have more and more precipitation, that water then wash those nutrients into the waterways. And all of a sudden, then you get these big algal blooms. Again, you've seen record algal blooms. I was with Mr. Latta in his district up on Lake Erie. You had algal bloom in the state of Ohio, in Toledo, that had 500,000 people not able to drink water for 3 days. Now, when you put more and more kind of corn on the landscape, and you take these acres of grasses or wetlands or forests out of production, or out of habitat into production, you lose that value for them to bring up those nutrients. And so this wasn't supposed to happen. I mean, there's very clear language that EPA is supposed to take action if there's any kind of economic or environmental harm. They haven't been doing this because of this compliance approach. And so we have 3 recommendations that we'll hope the committee will consider. The first one is that Mr. Welch brought this up earlier. We really need to demand the triennial report. There was a report in 2011 said that the impacts would be very inconsequential on the landscape. It's just not true. We have verified from academic institutions, and I have no economic stake in this. I just want good hunting. I just want good fishing, good birding. I want to make sure that we have enough wildlife to pass on to our kids. So first of all, we need that report, because what it's going to show is that we've lost a lot of acres of habitat. The second thing is that we have to have EPA follow the law. And you heard today, when folks talk about the environmental consequence, they only talk about air. You've heard it from EPA today. You've heard it from other people on this panel. They don't talk about the land use and the water implications. We need to look at all of those. And frankly, we need to get that right now because as you have billions of gallons of advanced biofuels coming on the landscape, we need to make sure that's also not taking more and more land away from hunters, anglers, and wildlife. And then the third thing is that we need to make the RFS as a statute much more wildlife friendly. We need to make sure we get rid of this aggregate compliance mechanism where they look at the total land instead of looking at individual lands that are being converted for crops. We need to accurately assess the impacts on wildlife. We need to make sure that we're moving the number below the blend wall because when we're above that, we're losing too much land for wildlife. And also, there's other policies, things like the Conservation Reserve Program that's been cut, things like the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, other subsidies, other conservation programs that we cut that some folks say is a good thing. The problem is when you cut those things, all of a sudden farmers want to put their land into production instead of keeping it for habitat. So again, we've kind of met the enemy, and he is us in this case. This was government-created crisis in many ways. Thank you.